June 7th, 1944. Off the coast of Normandy. EUR 452 hours. The morning fog hangs low over the English Channel, thick enough to blur the horizon into a single grey sheet. Cold waves slap against steel hulls. The air tastes of salt and diesel. Allied ships, hundreds of them, sit anchored in organised chaos just off the newly captured beaches. Aboard a German observation post near Arromanches, Oberleutnant Franz Keller steadies his binoculars against the wind. He scans the water with narrowed eyes. Something feels off. The Americans and British landed yesterday, D-Day, but the beaches still have no port, no established supply point. According to every German engineer, every intelligence report, every high-ranking officer, this invasion force should be struggling by now. Without a harbour, the Allies should be unable to unload tanks or fuel fast enough to sustain a long-term offensive. Yet Keller sees none of the hesitation he expected. Ships move with purpose. Boats unload rapidly. And the enemy seems to be preparing for something. A shape emerges through the fog. A massive, block-like structure being towed by tugboats. Keller frowns. What in the world is that? The German sergeant beside him adjusts his cap. Sunken ship? Too smooth. A barge? Too tall. The object is enormous concrete, angular, built with brutal precision, and more like it begin to appear behind the first. Keller lowers the binoculars. These are not ships, he whispers. These are pieces. Pieces of what? He raises the binoculars again, but the fog thickens. The shapes vanish like ghosts. On the Allied side, something unthinkable begins. Aboard a British tugboat cutting across the grey waves, engineer Thomas Larkin wipes spray from his face as he watches the floating giant behind him, a phoenix caisson, slowly lumber through the water. The concrete block is taller than buildings, heavier than battleships, and shaped like a piece of a man-made fortress. The sea rumbles as it moves. One crewman shakes his head in disbelief. Never thought I'd see the day we tow an entire harbour across the channel. Another laughs. And never thought it would actually stay afloat. Larkin grins, tired but determined. It'll do more than float. It'll help win the war. He looks toward the distant French shoreline, still lit by the occasional artillery flash. Somewhere along that coast, men are fighting and dying, and every tank, truck, rifle, shell, and ration they need must come through this improvised masterpiece. The crew turns the tugboat slightly, lining up the caisson with the beach. Behind them, dozens more appear giant floating docks, metal roadway sections, pierheads, pontoons, repair units, block ships. The English Channel is slowly transforming into a highway of industrial miracles. The Germans panic. Back on Keller's overlook, the fog briefly clears, and his breath catches. More concrete giants move across the water. More tugboats push vast steel frameworks toward the shore. And strange floating roadways unfold like mechanical serpents. He stumbles backward. No, this cannot be real. The sergeant looks confused. What are they doing? Keller swallows hard. They're building something out at sea. He turns, shouting toward a runner. Get headquarters on the line, immediately. Within minutes, German intel officers gather around Keller's crude map table, all staring through binoculars at the bizarre scene unfolding offshore. One officer scoffs. You must be mistaken. The Allies cannot build a port. It takes years. Another nods sharply. Concrete needs months to cure. Steelwork like that requires dry docks. This is impossible. Keller slams his fist on the table. And yet it is happening. The officers fall silent. Out on the water, the first Phoenix caisson begins to sink, deliberately settling into position like a giant stepping stone planted on the ocean floor. A second caisson lines up behind it. Then a third. Then a fourth. Massive block ships are dragged into place and scuttled, forming a breakwater. Floating roads, whale piers connect like vertebrae. The sea is no longer natural. It is being reshaped. The sergeant finally whispers the fear every German officer is thinking. They're building a harbour. Keller lowers his binoculars. His face drains of colour. They are doing in days what we said could never be done. The reality hits. Wind rattles the small observation bunker as German officers gather around the radio. Reports pour in from multiple positions along the coast. Enemy structures rising from the water. Tugboats towing concrete blocks. Huge cranes assembling platforms. Artificial harbor taking shape. Inside the room, shock turns to disbelief. We never prepared for this. We said it was impossible. No engineer could build such a thing so fast. And certainly not at sea. Keller watches the horizon as another section of floating roadway locks into place. The Allies are not improvising. They are executing a plan. A plan so bold and innovative that German command dismissed it as fantasy. But fantasies don't anchor themselves to the seabed. Fantasies don't create breakwaters. Fantasies don't assemble docks capable of supporting the world's largest invasion force. Keller turns to the officers. Sir, if they complete that harbor, he hesitates. They will not just land at Normandy. They will stay here. They will advance. And they will not be stopped. Outside, another concrete giant drops into the sea. The Mulberry Harbor is beginning to rise. And Germany is watching its worst assumption become reality. June 8, 1944. Off Arromanches, Normandy. 08:17 hours. The air is filled with the groan of engines and the roar of waves hammering steel. The sky above is a pale, washed-out blue too calm for what is happening below. Hundreds of Allied engineers, sailors, and soldiers scramble across floating platforms, shouting instructions through the wind. Tools clang against metal, ropes whip against decks. The salty spray stings exposed skin. They are building a harbor, an entire port faster than anyone has ever attempted in human history. On a floating pontoon, engineer Thomas Larkin leans over a welded joint glowing red-hot. Hold it steady. If that section shifts, the whole pier will twist. A Royal Navy petty officer braces himself against a surge of water. These waves weren't in the bloody blueprints. Larkin laughs breathlessly. Nothing about this job is in the blueprints. He wipes sweat from his forehead, even though the air is bitter cold. Behind him, tugboats maneuver the next Phoenix caisson into position. It looms like a grey fortress, towering above the workers as it glides across the surface of the sea. A young US Army private stares at it, eyes wide. Never thought I'd see skyscrapers floating. Larkin taps him on the shoulder. Son, wait until you see what happens when we sink them. The Germans don't understand the plan. Yet. On a nearby ridge, Oberleutnant Keller watches the operation with binoculars, surrounded by senior officers who cannot believe what they are seeing. One colonel mutters angrily, "Why would they bring buildings to the beach? What purpose could it possibly serve?" Keller lowers the binoculars. They're not buildings, they're the walls of a harbor. A stunned silence follows. Then the colonel barks, "Nonsense. The tides will tear them apart." Keller glances back toward the water. Perhaps. But they have calculated something we have not. Back at sea, the sinking of the giants. On Larkin's tugboat, a signal flare pops upward from the breakwater line. "Sink it," a voice bellows over a megaphone. The tug crew springs into motion. Valves spin, pumps whir. Water begins flooding into the bottom chambers of the Phoenix caisson. The giant structure trembles, groaning as it loses buoyancy. The young private watches in awe. "It's going under." Larkin nods. And when it does, it becomes a wall. The caisson sinks slowly, deliberately, settling on the seafloor in perfect alignment with the others. Spray crashes over the top as water wraps around it like a living thing. The moment it locks in place, the entire line stabilizes. A barrier. A breakwater. A shield against the raw power of the channel. Larkin lets out a long exhale. One down, 35 more to go. German High Command responds late. Back in the German command bunker near Caen, intelligence officers scramble over maps and frantic radio updates. Major slams his fist on the table. This is not possible. They cannot build a port in the water. A younger officer responds shakily. "Sir, they already are." The major points at the map sharply. Then destroy it. Send what we have left in the Luftwaffe. Bomb the structures before they complete them. The room falls uncomfortably quiet. A senior officer clears his throat. The Luftwaffe cannot reach Normandy in force anymore. The major's face darkens. You mean? Yes. The P-51 Mustangs and naval anti-air have the skies locked. The realization lands like a weight. The Allies are building a harbor, and Germany cannot stop them. The sea fights back. Back on the Allied side, the challenge shifts. The Germans are no longer the immediate danger. The ocean is. A sudden gust sends waves slamming into the floating roadways. Engineers brace themselves as the structures sway violently. One roadway section slips out of alignment and crashes into the side of a caisson, sending a thunderous boom across the water. Larkin curses. If that breaks, we lose the whole pier. He jumps onto the platform, boots sliding over wet steel, grabbing a dangling chain. A US Navy boatswain shouts, "Hold her steady, bring the winch around." The wind howls. Water sprays. The floating road bucks like a wild animal. Larkin grits his teeth. You're not breaking today. Not before we finish this. With a coordinated heave from multiple crews, the pier section locks back into place. The structure stabilizes. Cheers break out short, shaky, exhausted. But Larkin stays focused. That was a warning. The sea wants to kill this project. He looks at the distant line of caissons and pontoons. But we aren't letting it. A revelation in the German lines. As the day wears on, Keller returns to headquarters with a final report. He speaks quietly, as though admitting a confession. Sir, they are building a harbor faster than we can comprehend. Our engineers say such a project would take months. They are doing it in days. The German colonel trembles with disbelief. No nation can build a port on the open sea. Keller looks back toward the coastline. They can, because they already are. He pauses, voice soft but heavy. And when it is finished, our chance of pushing them into the sea will be gone forever. The colonel sinks into his chair. This changes everything. Outside, another Phoenix caisson sinks into position, sending a deep rumble through the coastline. The Mulberry Harbor is becoming real. And Germany is running out of time. June 9th, 1944. Normandy coast. 07:12 hours. Morning fog lifts slowly as the first light spreads across the improvised construction zone. The sea glimmers like broken glass. The coastline still echoes with distant gunfire, but here on the water, the war feels strangely different. It feels like creation instead of destruction. Thomas Larkin stands on a floating roadway panel, soaked from the knees down, watching a line of Allied landing craft drop off fresh crews of engineers. Men jump onto pontoons carrying tool bags, welding torches, heavy bolts. No one walks. Everyone runs. Larkin turns to a young Royal Engineer beside him. We have 48 hours to finish the pierhead. No delays. The soldier nods, breath already short. The floating roadway trembles under another strong wave. Seagulls circle overhead, confused by the massive shapes forming along the shoreline. Behind them, the Mulberry Harbor is starting to look like an actual port. Blockships scuttled into a protective arc, caissons standing like sentinels in the water, long floating highways stretching toward the beach. It is a city being born from the sea. Larkin points toward a crane ship. Signal them. We need the pier legs lowered now. The engineer waves frantically with a bright flag. The crane begins lowering the massive steel support columns. The chain rattles loudly as the wind whips across the platform. Men on the pier guide the legs into place with a precision that seems impossible given the rocking motion. When the legs finally touch the seabed, the platform stops trembling. The steel settles. The entire structure becomes firmer. One man laughs in relief. We have a floor. Now we build the rest. Larkin smiles, exhausted. One step at a time. German fear turns to confusion. In a bunker overlooking the beach, Oberleutnant Keller spreads updated reconnaissance photos across a table. Officers crowd around, eyes wide. The images show a breakwater forming, floating roads growing, crane ships lifting pre-built sections into place. One captain shakes his head slowly. They are building a port. A real port. Another officer adds with disbelief. And they are doing it in front of us. Keller points at the newly installed pier legs. That structure can unload tanks, heavy ones, supplies, vehicles, artillery. The colonel slams his hand on the table. Why did no one warn us of this? Keller speaks softly. Because we said it could not be done. Silence fills the room. Outside, the rumble of distant Allied artillery reminds them that every hour the harbor grows, the invasion becomes stronger. The first test of strength. Back on the water, a series of dark clouds rolls in from the west. Rain begins to fall, light at first, then heavier. The sea stirs under the shifting wind. A Royal Navy signalman calls out, "Weather incoming. Brace yourselves." Larkin looks at the unfinished pierhead, the floating road, the anchored caissons. All of it exposed. Vulnerable. Young. The waves begin hammering the metal sides hard enough to shake the entire platform. A soldier yells over the rising wind. If the roadway snaps, the whole system collapses. Larkin grabs a thick cable and pulls it into a locking ring. Not on my watch. Get another crew on the starboard side. Reinforce every connection. Move. The storm hits fully now. Rain lashes sideways. Waves crash onto the floating highway, drenching the men with frozen spray. They cling to ropes, skidding across slick steel panels. A pontoon rises violently on a swell, lifting several men before slamming back down with a thunderous crash. One man loses his footing. Larkin lunges, grabbing his jacket and hauling him up before he slips beneath the waves. Behind them, a massive caisson groans as tides slam against its concrete face, but it holds firm. It was built to fight the sea, and it stands its ground. A breakthrough. Hours later, the storm eases. Clouds part slowly. The sky settles into a calmer grey. The men slump onto the wet metal, exhausted and shaking. Larkin looks around. The piers are still standing. The breakwater is still intact. The floating highways have not broken. "We held," he says quietly. A young sailor smiles weakly. "Sir, I think this thing is going to work." Larkin stands and surveys the entire growing harbour. It already is. German officers see the truth. Later that afternoon, Keller receives another photo package. He holds one image for a long moment before speaking. The Allies are not improvising this. They planned every detail. They brought an entire harbour with them and assembled it faster than we can react. The colonel stares at the picture. If they can unload armour and fuel without a port city, our coastal defences are already meaningless. Keller nods. And once the harbour is complete, they will push inland with more men and more equipment than we can stop. The colonel leans back, pale. We are watching the invasion become permanent. Outside the bunker, Allied cranes continue to rise above the surf. Men continue to weld. Tugboats continue to deliver massive structural components. The Mulberry Harbor is no longer an experiment. It is a lifeline, a fortress, a path into France. And Germany still has no plan to stop it. June 10th, 1944. Aramanches. 10:26 hours. For the first time since D-Day, the coastline feels almost organized. The chaos of landing craft, smoke, and gunfire is giving way to something structured, something impossible, something Germany never believed could be built in open water. Thomas Larkin stands on the completed pierhead as a supply ship approaches. The ship's anchor chain rattles. The bow cuts through the waves. Its deck is stacked with crates and fuel drums. The men watch silently, breath held, waiting to see if their creation can handle a real load. A boatswain calls out. Bring her alongside, slow and steady. Winches turn, ropes tighten. The ship eases against the pierhead with a deep, metallic groan. The floating roadway flexes under the weight, but it does not sag. It bends like a spine, absorbing the motion. Larkin grips the railing. This is it, the first real test. A crane swings forward, lowering a hook toward the ship's cargo. The workers attach a massive crate. The crane strains, then lifts it high into the air. Every man watches the cables for any sign of stress. The crate clears the ship's deck. The pierhead holds firm. A cheer erupts across the structure. Larkin exhales slowly. Gentlemen, we have a harbour. Nearby, a Scottish engineer laughs. In 10 days we built what they said could not be built in 10 years. The men shake hands, slap backs, shout to one another with the joy of a miracle confirmed. The Mulberry Harbor is alive. Germany finally understands the danger. In a German headquarters near St. Lo, an intelligence officer bursts through the door carrying new reconnaissance photos. He slams them onto the colonel's desk. Sir, the Allies are unloading tanks. On the water. With no port. The harbor is operational. The colonel grabs the photographs, flipping through them quickly. His face hardens with each image. Crates lined up on the pier. Sherman tanks rolling down floating roadways. Fuel trucks driving straight from the sea onto the expanding beachhead. A supply chain functioning, as if Normandy had a fully built city dock. The colonel whispers, "This cannot be real." Keller finally speaks. "Sir, with respect, it is happening whether we believe it or not." The colonel's voice cracks. "If they can unload armor at this speed, they will push toward Caen by next week. They will resupply faster than we can counterattack." Keller nods grimly. Then the window to drive them back into the sea has closed. The colonel drops the photos on the table, defeated. "We lost Normandy the moment that harbour touched water." The Allies waste no time. Back at Mulberry, everything moves with mechanical rhythm. Trucks roll non-stop from the pier to the beach. Tanks crawl down the floating causeways, engines rumbling. Thousands of tons of supplies pour across the structure each day. Larkin stands beside a British commander who watches the scene with awe. "I cannot believe we are standing on a floating road," the commander says. Larkin smiles. "Believe it. This is how we win the war." A jeep roars past, splashing water across the metal panels. Workers step aside as more vehicles pour down the piers like a stream of steel. The commander points offshore. "And what about the second harbour, the American one?" Larkin nods. "Mulberry A. They are assembling it off Omaha Beach. If both ports operate, the Germans will never be able to starve us of supplies." The commander folds his arms. "They underestimated our imagination." Larkin looks back at the men still welding, still bolting, still fighting the tide. "They underestimated our will." A storm on the horizon. Later that evening, as the sun dips low and turns the water silver, a meteorologist rushes toward Larkin with a grim expression. "We have weather forming in the Atlantic. Something strong, possibly dangerous." Larkin's smile fades. "How strong?" The meteorologist hesitates. "A storm with unusual pressure shifts. It could hit us in 48 hours. Larkin steps onto the pier and looks out at the vast construction he helped build. The cranes, the roads, the caissons, the anchored ships. Thousands of men depending on this harbour. A storm like the one the meteorologist described could tear the whole thing apart. He whispers to himself, "Not now, not after how far we've come." He tightens his jaw. "Prep every anchor. Double the cables. Rally every crew. We reinforce everything." The meteorologist nods but looks unsure. Can a floating harbour survive a storm like this? Larkin stares out at the sea. It has to. Because if it doesn't, the entire Allied invasion could collapse. June 19th, 1944. Normandy coast. Nightfall. The sky turns a heavy, bruised grey long before the sun disappears. The wind begins as a whisper, then grows into a steady, unsettling moan across the open water. Seagulls flee inland. Waves rise and slam against the caissons with dull, booming force. Thomas Larkin stands on the pier, boots already slipping on the wet steel. The first droplets of rain strike like cold needles. Every instinct he has tells him that the sea is preparing for war. A British petty officer shouts above the rising wind. The pressure is dropping fast. This will not be a normal squall. Larkin tightens a rope around a steel mooring post. Then we prepare for what is not normal. Crewmen run along the floating roadways, hammering down reinforcement plates and tightening anchor cables. Tugboats push against the sides of the pier, trying to keep sections aligned. Orders echo through the storm as men struggle to hear one another over the roar of the waves. A young engineer slips, catches himself, and shouts. If the breakwater fails, the whole thing unravels. Larkin grabs his arm. Then stay on your feet. We ride this out. A giant wave crashes over the pier, drenching both of them. The water is ice cold. The deck rattles beneath their boots. The storm has arrived. Germany watches nature fight for them. In a sheltered German command post inland, Oberleutnant Keller studies weather charts illuminated by lantern light. The officers around him whisper with a strange mix of hope and disbelief. One officer speaks quietly. If the Allies lose their harbour, they lose their lifeline. Another adds, a storm could do what our army cannot. Keller does not smile. He knows the storm is real. He knows the Mulberry Harbor is vulnerable. He also knows how much the Allies have invested in it. He whispers to himself. But they created something we never imagined. If it survives this, nothing will stop them. The colonel, standing nearby, listens to the wind howling outside and nods grimly. This is the sea's chance to save France. The battle in the darkness. Back at Mulberry, the wind becomes a living force. Waves slam into the Phoenix caissons with thunderous cracks. Spray shoots 50 feet into the air. The floating roadways twist and flex under the pressure, rising and falling like the ribcage of a giant living creature. Larkin clings to a railing as another massive swell crashes over the pier, knocking 2 workers off their feet. He shouts to the men nearby. Get them up. Stay roped in. No one moves alone. A crane groans loudly as its cables strain against the wind. Sparks jump from a loose connection box. A pontoon smashes into the side of a caisson, sending up a burst of white foam. One of the engineers screams. The anchor line is snapping. Larkin races forward with 2 men, slipping and sliding across the deck. They reach the anchor point just as a loud crack rings out. The cable whips upward, missing Larkin by inches and slamming into the sea. If we lose too many anchors, the pier will break apart, Larkin shouts. The men tie down a backup line and pray it holds. A moment of collapse. Shortly after midnight, the worst happens. A massive wave rises out of the darkness and slams into one of the floating road sections with unbelievable force. The metal groans, the hinges shudder, the roadway lifts violently before smashing back down. Then a sound cuts through the storm. A deep, sharp snap. The section breaks loose. The entire pier shakes. Workers shout in panic. The detached roadway swings wildly, slamming into the next section and tearing it free. Larkin stares in horror. If one more section breaks, the whole line will fail. He rushes forward through waist-high water, grabbing a wet cable and trying to drag the broken piece toward a stabilizing hook. 2 men join him, then 2 more, pulling with everything they have. The sea fights back with every wave. Come on, hold, Larkin gasps. Their boots slide. Their hands burn. The storm roars. Then the roadway locks into the hook. The men collapse, soaked, shaking. Larkin looks up toward the dark horizon. Not tonight, he whispers. You are not taking this harbor tonight. Mulberry A falls. Mulberry B fights on. By dawn, the storm finally begins to weaken. The wind slows. The waves stop climbing. The sea returns to something almost normal, but the damage is clear. On the beach, officers survey the wreckage of the American Mulberry A. It is destroyed, torn apart by the storm, beyond repair. But Mulberry B, the British harbour at Arromanches, still stands. It is damaged. It is battered. But it lives. Larkin walks the length of the pier, exhausted men trailing behind him. They inspect every joint, every hinge, every beam. Many are bent. Some are broken, but most are intact. A British captain approaches him. We lost Mulberry A, but yours survived. How? Larkin looks back at the battered harbour rising out of the sea like a wounded giant that refuses to fall. Because we refuse to let go, he says quietly. The captain nods. Then this harbour will carry the weight of the entire invasion. Larkin watches as the first post-storm supply ship approaches, slow but steady. We built it for that, he says. And the moment the ship docks, Larkin knows something important. Germany's last real chance to break the invasion has passed. Mulberry B survived the storm, Now the Allies will deliver everything they need to drive into France. June 23rd, 1944. Aramanches. Morning light. The sea is calm again. A soft breeze carries the smell of salt and fuel across the water. For the first time in days, sunlight glints peacefully off the waves. But beneath that calm lies the memory of a storm that nearly changed the course of the war. Thomas Larkin stands on the pierhead, boots still wet, uniform still stained with dried seawater. He looks tired, older than he did before the storm, but he stands tall. Around him, dozens of engineers and sailors move with renewed purpose. The harbour survived. Now it has to work. A British Liberty ship approaches, escorted by a pair of landing craft. Its deck is stacked high with crates, artillery, fuel drums, and ammunition boxes. As it draws near, the men on the pier cheer. This is the ship they feared they would never unload if the storm had won. Larkin signals the crane crew. Bring her in, slow and clean. The massive ship settles against the pierhead. The crane lifts the first crate. The loading crew lines up. Trucks roll into place. The entire harbour comes alive with the rhythm of industry. A US Army sergeant watches the operation with disbelief. Sir, this looks like Southampton, not a battlefield. Larkin smiles. That is the point. We brought a port with us. The German realization hits home. In a command bunker inland, Oberleutnant Keller reviews the latest aerial photographs. His face is tight with dread. The images show the Mulberry Harbor functioning at full capacity. Lines of trucks streaming from the pier. Tanks rolling straight onto the beach. Supplies being unloaded faster than ever before. A staff officer speaks in a low, defeated voice. They lost one harbour, yet this one is enough to sustain their entire army. Keller places the photos gently on the table. With this port, they can fuel their advance, feed their troops, bring armour, artillery, and reinforcements without pause. It means the Allies will not be pushed back. They will only move forward. The colonel nearby shakes his head slowly. We believed they could not do this in 10 days. They did it in 9. Another officer speaks quietly. How did our intelligence fail so badly? Keller looks out the narrow bunker window toward the coastline. We never imagined they would try something so ambitious. And we never imagined they would succeed. The lifeline of the liberation, the turning of the war. Within weeks, Allied divisions push inland with increasing strength. The Mulberry Harbor continues feeding the French countryside with war machines and manpower. What began as a desperate construction gamble becomes one of the most important logistical achievements of the entire Second World War. In London, commanders study reports detailing the harbor's performance. One general smiles as he reads the numbers. If the Germans thought we would starve on the beach, they were very wrong. Another responds. We did not starve, we grew stronger. A quiet victory on the water. One evening, as the sun sets over the calm sea, the men of Mulberry gather on the pier. They sit on crates, leaning back against caissons and pontoons, tired but proud. Larkin joins them, finally letting himself rest. A sailor asks him, "When you first heard the idea, did you believe it could work?" Larkin looks out across the floating city they built. "I believed it had to work," he says quietly. "And sometimes, that is enough." The men fall silent, watching ships move across the horizon. The harbour hums with the low thrum of machinery. The water glows orange under the fading sun. No medals will be given here. No parades will march for the engineers who fought the sea instead of an enemy. But everyone present knows the truth. Without Mulberry, the Allied invasion might have stalled. With it, the liberation of Western Europe became unstoppable. Germany's final acknowledgement. Later that week, a captured German officer is questioned by Allied intelligence. When shown a photograph of the Mulberry Harbor, he stares at it in disbelief. He finally speaks. "We thought you were bluffing. We thought no one could build this." The interrogator asks. "And now?" The German officer sighs. "Now I know how we lost the war. You built a harbor where the sea should have stopped you." The legacy of Mulberry. The harbor stands for months, surviving battles, tides, and storms. It becomes a monument to Allied determination, engineering brilliance, and the ability to do the impossible when everything is at stake. Larkin walks the pier one last time before being reassigned inland. He pauses at the edge, watching waves wash gently against the steel pontoons. He whispers to the sea, "You tried your best, but so did we." He steps back onto solid ground, leaving behind the harbour that changed history. Mulberry was more than a port. It was the moment Germany realised the Allies would not be contained. It was the moment the invasion became unstoppable. It was the moment imagination defeated expectation.